Welcome to Parsons School of Design at the New School. My name is Robert Kirkbride. I'm Dean of Parsons School of Constructed Environments, which includes architecture, interior design, lighting, product and industrial design. And we have been digging into this issue of disaster preparedness for the past 3 years, stepping toward a full exhibition with the Earth Manual project with our partner Hirokazu Nagata, Plus Arts, and the Japan Foundation and Zollberg Institute of Human Migration and Mobility here at the New School. This project is perfectly tuned in timing sequence with Jonathan's lecture this evening. I was delighted when Anne Rieselbach at the Architectural League of New York invited me to say, could we have Jonathan speak? Because it intersects with an intensive, a design intensive that is school-wide. This is the second year we're going to be doing this, and it has been a stepping stone to bring the Earth Manual project looking at natural disasters around the world and adding to it our New York-centered disaster experience. Now, this year, what we were including in the exhibit, some of you may have joined us for the pre-lecture reception over at 66 Fifth Avenue. That is an exhibit, soft opening this evening, full opening Thursday night, along with our SCE convocation. It is launching this year's Disaster Preparedness 2.0, a week-long school-wide commitment to examining disaster preparedness in not just the natural environment, but the human-made conditions. Because whether you're in Boston or experiencing the typhoon or Florence, wherever you happen to be in the world, you can throw a dart at the map and find these disasters that are coalescing as natural and human-made catastrophes. So we have experts with us tonight who are going to update us on what is happening on the ground, what has happened, where we are going, specifically in Puerto Rico. And I just wanted to highlight, because Jonathan's work down in Puerto Rico with the solar panels is also connected to one of our faculty members, or two of our faculty members, Walter Meyer and Jennifer Bolstad, who have been focusing in our urban resilience studio on these issues. They, of course, worked with Jonathan on this in Puerto Rico to respond to the conditions there. We also had students from our MFA Lighting and Dual Degree, MARC programs, who went down on their own volition, raising their own funds, and documented working with communities in darkness around the subject of light and power. So that video and that work is on exhibit, and I want to just invite you to visit our galleries at 66 Fifth Avenue and the Sheila Johnson Design Center. And I want to thank again Architectural League of New York for co-sponsoring this important and timely talk with us this evening. And with that, I will hand the microphone over to Rosalie Genevre from Architectural League of New York. Thank you very much and enjoy your evening.
I'd like to add my welcome to Robert and to thank Robert and Parsons for hosting this lecture here tonight. My name is Rosalie Genevro, and I'm the Executive Director of the Architectural League. Tonight's lecture from the League side is the Franzen Lecture on Architecture and Environment. We created this lectureship in 2006 in honor of our longtime board member, Ulrich Franzen, an influential modernist architect who was deeply involved with the League from the early 1960s until his death in 2012. He was an enthusiastic supporter of the League's work to advance innovative thinking in environmental issues. Support for this lecture series was provided by his friends Leonard and Louise Riggio, Juliana Terry and Gilbert, and Elise Jaffe and Jeffrey Brown. Earlier lectures in this series have been given by Renzo Piano, Shigeru Ban, Jeannie Gang, and Werner Sobeck. We're very excited to have tonight's lecture delivered by Jonathan Marvel, representing the team of people who acted with great initiative and alacrity to form Resilient Power Puerto Rico immediately after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico last September 20th, a little less than a year ago today. Hurricane Maria was a major disaster for Puerto Rico, completely knocking out the island's power supply, disrupting communication and roads, destroying a substantial portion of the island's healthcare capacity, and making life desperately hard for people in myriad other ways. The response of the U.S. government was disproportionate and meager compared to other instances of hurricane relief, such as that provided to Houston after Hurricane Harvey. And it was totally inadequate to cope with the needs of individuals and communities in the immediate aftermath of Maria. Although it can never be a substitute for efficient, adequate, well-planned, and effectively delivered government response, there's been a really significant level of NGO and other volunteer effort to help address Puerto Rico's needs, excuse me, including the work of Resilient Power Puerto Rico that we'll be hearing about tonight. Excuse me. Jonathan Marvel is a third-generation architect with a practice based in 2 offices. Here in New York, he and his firm are doing significant work all over the city and all over the country, and they're having a particular impact in Brooklyn with projects including St. Anne's Warehouse, multiple projects at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the Pier House Apartments at Brooklyn Bridge Park, and many others. Marvel Architects also has an office in San Juan, Puerto Rico, where Jonathan grew up. The office continues a family tradition. Jonathan's father, Thomas Marvel, led one of the most influential practices in San Juan, and his mother, Lucilla Fuller Marvel, is a planner who is principal of the planning firm Taller de Planificación Social and author of the book Listen to What They Say, Planning and Community Development in Puerto Rico. Jonathan will talk about how he and his colleagues mobilized very quickly to form Resilient Power Puerto Rico, what has been accomplished to date, and what they're working on for the future. Something that became very clear in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria is that many Americans are either unaware of or confused about the structure of government in Puerto Rico and the political issues that shape this part of the United States and affect our fellow citizens. We've asked Deepak Lamba-Nieves to provide a prologue to Jonathan's lecture to set the stage for understanding what is going on in Puerto Rico now, by providing a brief overview of how the structure of Puerto Rico came to be what it is, and of the economic and political challenges and opportunities that face the island. Deepak has a master's in city planning from UC Berkeley and a doctorate in urban and regional studies from MIT, and he is research director of the Center for a New Economy in Puerto Rico, a think tank that has garnered wide attention and praise for its incisive research and analyses of Puerto Rican issues. Following Jonathan's lecture, we'll bring Deepak back to the stage, along with Jonathan and others, for discussion and for questions from you. So please join me in welcoming Deepak Lamba-Nieves.
Thank you very much, Rosalie, for that kind introduction, and thank you all for being here and your interest in Puerto Rico. Thank you to Jonathan as well for inviting me and for doing this and talking about Puerto Rico to different audiences. I think it's important for all of us in the island. So just to provide a bit of background, the Center for a New Economy is an independent, not-for-profit think tank based in San Juan, Puerto Rico. It was founded in 1998 and produces rigorous public policy research and analysis, and is the most credible and influential voices in the island and in the United States and Puerto Rico's economy. Since 2014, the center has been recognized as one of the top think tanks to watch by the Global Think Tank Report of the University of Pennsylvania, a distinction we are very proud of. Now, before my formal remarks, I want to raise 3 important caveats. First, I am not an architect. I received undergraduate training in economics, and I have graduate degrees in development planning. Thus, I will be approaching tonight's topics from a different vantage point than most lecturers invited to the Architectural League. Second, I'm not an expert in climate-induced disasters, energy policy, or post-disaster planning. My research and scholarship have been mostly focused on economic development and the nexus between migration and development. Nonetheless, as an engaged scholar, I feel compelled to abandon my academic comfort zone and participate in conversations that help me analyze and make sense of Puerto Rico's contemporary reality. I would like to start off by showing you a very revealing graph that summarizes Puerto Rico's economic situation from 2006 until the present, a period some of us in the island refer to as our lost decade. As you can see, since 2006, all major indicators have plummeted. Economic activity has shrunk by almost 18%. Employment has decreased by over 20%. Unemployment currently stands at 9.1%, and the proportion of people available to work stands at 41% only, while a third of the government workforce has shrunk by a third since 2008. Population is down 12% throughout the decade, and this figure does not consider post-disaster mobility. Recent census numbers indicate that 97,000 people moved from Puerto Rico to the U.S. in 2017, but given data limitations, it's too early to paint a full migration picture. Gross domestic fixed investment has also seen a significant plunge since 2006, although there were some improvements in 2011 and 2012, mostly due to the Obama-era American Recovery and Reconstruction Act funds. The last few years have seen steep declines, mostly in construction investments. Looking more closely at building permits allows us to see the effects of declining investments more clearly. As the graph shows, residential construction permits for both single and multifamily structures have seen a massive decline of 89%. But behind these macro indicators lies another story, one that underscores the hardships that most Puerto Ricans in the island, especially those at the bottom of the socioeconomic scale, are enduring. Median yearly income in the island is $19.3 thousand, which is about a third of the median income in the United States. 43.5% of the population lives in poverty. That's more than double the rate of Mississippi, the poorest state of the Union, while 38% of Puerto Rico's residents try to make ends meet with the help of the Nutritional Assistance Program, formerly known as the Food Stamp Program. One of the root causes of these chilling poverty and social welfare indicators is inequality, which has been on the rise and has reverted back to levels seen in the 1970s, as evidenced in this current slide. In 2013, Puerto Rico was one of the 5 most unequal societies in the world, along with countries like Zambia, Honduras, South Africa, and Lesotho, and is currently the most unequal jurisdiction in all of the United States. The deterioration of our labor markets, the rollback of welfare benefits, and the implementation of severe austerity policies since 2005 have all contributed to this worrisome trend. The summary I've just provided, aside from painting a very grim picture, raises a fundamental question. How did we get here? In order to answer this query, we have to take a quick yet deep dive into our history. Puerto Rico was a colony of Spain from 1493, when Columbus arrived during his second voyage to the so-called New World, until 1898, when the United States invaded the island. For most of the Spanish colonial period, Puerto Rico endured a harsh subsistence economy. Capitalism came late to the island, and it wasn't until the 19th century that we started exporting coffee and sugar to the international markets. As this 19th century map of the island's meager and simple road system depicts, the Spanish crown invested very little in what many considered a neglected colony. Throughout the 400 years of the brutal Spanish rule, Puerto Rico was a highly unequal society where a very small landowning class coexisted with a large, poor, peasant population. This highly unequal social structure did not change much after the United States invaded the island in 1898. For the first 3 decades of American rule, a harsh program of colonial dominance and assimilation was implemented. American colonial practices led to the establishment of a series of governance experiments that, according to Judge Juan Torruellas of the First Circuit Court of Appeals in Boston, began with the Foraker Act of 1900, which established a civilian colonial government in the island. It continued with the Jones Act of 1917, which, among other things, extended U.S. citizenship to the residents of Puerto Rico, and further continued with the adoption of the Commonwealth status in 1952. Under the Commonwealth status, Puerto Rico is supposed to resemble a State of the Union, save for the fact that we do not pay federal taxes, some federal programs are not extended to the island, and others are strictly capped, like Medicaid and nutritional assistance. Moreover, Congress has plenary powers to impose their will on the people of Puerto Rico without our consent. Despite clear indications that Commonwealth status created a second-class U.S. citizenship for those residing in Puerto Rico, it was supported by many in the island because it facilitated the advancement of a development strategy known as Operation Bootstrap, which helped industrialize the island at the height of the Cold War. Through the creative use of tax policies such as Section 931 and later Section 936 of the Internal Revenue Code, an economic enclave was set up where foreign multinationals were able to establish operations and repatriate billions in profits to the mainland U.S. tax-free. But while the bootstrap model helped raise living standards, especially throughout the 1950s and 60s, it was built on shaky ground. Aside from tax incentives to attract foreign investments, the model required a massive international migration program that brought thousands of families to cities like this one, and the extension of transfer payments to address the lack of jobs and the enduring plight of those living in poverty. It also required increases in public sector employment to help build a consumer middle class and a cadre of partisan loyalists, and it required a lot of public debt to address the inevitable fiscal shortcomings and just to keep the model afloat. As the world economy became more globalized, Puerto Rico began to lose its comparative advantage of having unfettered access to U.S. markets. Perhaps more worrisome, very little was done to design a new economic strategy that did not depend on a tax policy that required congressional approval. When Congress decided to end the Section 936 program in 1996, after a 10-year phase-out period, the economy began to plummet. Starting in the year 2000, we began to accumulate very large primary deficits to make up for the lack of growth, and to fill the large fiscal holes we had dug up, we began to borrow heavily. By 2015, the island's leaders could no longer hide the fact that we could not pay our debts in full and keep the government running. Over decades, Puerto Rico had accumulated $72 billion in public debts and another $50 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. Interestingly, due to an arcane federal maneuver, the government and its public corporations could not benefit from bankruptcy protections unless Congress passed legislation to that effect, which it finally did in the summer of 2016 with the passing of PROMESA, the Puerto Rico Oversight, Management, and Economic Stability Act. Under PROMESA, Puerto Rico can settle its debts, its public debts, in an orderly manner. But the federal statute also imposes on the Commonwealth government and the people of Puerto Rico a 7-person board with very broad powers named solely by the President of the United States. According to Judge Torruella, the legal takeover through PROMESA harkens to the times of the Foraker Act, when an out-and-out undemocratic, racist, and violent colonial regime was established to rule over a recently acquired possession. As if all this wasn't enough, then came Hurricane Maria. With sustained winds of over 150 miles per hour and a southeast to northwest trajectory that placed the eye of the storm over numerous municipalities, the hurricane tore through Puerto Rico with fierce impunity. As a result, the whole island was left without power. Most areas did not have access to potable water nor basic telecommunications, and getting around in the immediate days after was almost impossible, given the fallen trees, the light posts blocking the roads, the absence of traffic lights, the collapse of bridges and the flooding of major thoroughfares, and the local government's imposition of an island-wide curfew. To this day, almost a year after Maria pummeled us, most basic systems are still in serious disrepair. Our energy infrastructure is weak and prone to blackouts. In many communities across the island, when the power goes out, so does access to potable water and other life-saving services. For anyone who has traversed the island recently, the destroyed storefronts, the non-working stoplights, and the blue tarps over people's homes are a sad and common occurrence. Moreover, it has taken the government of Puerto Rico close to a year to count the dead and admit, after numerous scientific inquiries, that their previous undercounts were blatantly incorrect. Several factors help explain why it has taken so long to get the reconstruction off the ground. Amongst these are a series of unique federal rules and requirements that have been imposed on the government of Puerto Rico, a lack of technical capacity at all levels of government, and long-standing structural problems that have gone unattended for decades. Looking very briefly at the post-disaster housing situation gives us an idea of the complexities behind our slow reconstruction. According to official government data, close to 500,000 housing units, about a third of the housing stock, was destroyed or badly damaged. In addition, FEMA received 1.2 million applications for individual housing assistance, of which hundreds of thousands were initially denied for numerous reasons, but primarily because residents could not prove ownership of the property. As the graph demonstrates, land tenure is a major problem across the island, and one that has been in the making for centuries. Consequently, households that lack clear title to their own homes, which are mostly the poorest, receive very little in official assistance and will probably be removed without due compensation if they're located in a disaster-prone parcel or if they're living in structures that are not built up to codes. Unfortunately, forced relocations are highly likely to occur, given that the government plans to take advantage of the current moment to do away with informal housing in Puerto Rico. As the governor has stated, for those in informal properties, quote, "It's time to go," end quote. But considering that almost half of all the housing in the island has been classified as informal, and that a substantial portion of the island's terrain is either flood or landslide prone, a fundamental question arises. Where will all these people, who are the ones least served and the ones that have suffered the most, be housed? To conclude, I would like to highlight what I consider to be our biggest post-disaster planning challenge. At present, the control board imposed by the U.S. Congress is carrying out a draconian neoliberal austerity program focused on spending cuts, government right-sizing, labor reforms, and the privatization of public assets, with the goal of increasing private investment and ensuring that markets are less constrained. Never mind that former apologists, like the International Monetary Fund, have publicly asserted, backed by hard data, that these kinds of policies do more harm than good. At the same time that these policies are being administered, the government of Puerto Rico aims to implement a major post-disaster reconstruction effort. To my knowledge, this is a unique situation with few or no parallels, which poses a fundamental challenge for planners, who will not only have to design and implement effective reconstruction processes in compressed time, but will have to do so while the government's institutional scaffolding and public service platforms are being dismantled and reconfigured. As numerous experts have argued, reconstruction efforts require detailed data, coordination at numerous levels, the mobilization of stakeholders, and intensive planning exercises at multiple scales. It seems highly implausible that the control board's measure to right-size the government apparatus, which includes significant budget cuts for the University of Puerto Rico and numerous public agencies, will allow local governments to effectively lead the recovery effort. What does seem plausible is that the reconstruction will be guided by a market-centered approach, characterized by a high reliance on tax incentives and subsidies that, in the past, have proven to disproportionately benefit large firms and high-income residents. I would like to end on somewhat of a positive note in the midst of all these challenges. We're also observing at this moment some remarkable responses to the disaster from the grassroots. Some, like the Centros de Apoyo Mutuo or mutual aid centers, which are organized as a web of autonomous entities spread across the island, have set up mess houses with free food, distributed donated goods, organized cleanup brigade, occupied buildings to provide needed services, and taken advantage of these communal practices to engage in political organizing. In a similar vein, feminist organizations focused on sexual health issues and ending gender violence are expanding their mission to take on housing reconstruction, providing legal counsel, and helping families in very poor communities fill out FEMA forms. In many ways, these groups, and many more like them, like the Resilient Power Puerto Rico, which our keynote speaker, Jonathan Marvell, helped establish, are collectively building a community-driven recovery infrastructure that ensures that historically marginalized and most vulnerable are treated with dignity and also empowered politically. Like most of you, I'm looking forward to hearing more about it from Jonathan. Thank you very much.